how before, like, my aunt, like, was in complete denial. Like, she was one of the few people who saw what happened to me growing up, and actually kind of, like, blatantly saw it. Like, my grandmother didn't even really tone it down as much as she could have. Like, as much as she did if anybody else was around, she didn't really, like, literally half my face was swollen at one point, and my aunt told me that, I'd done this to myself. And as much as I made joke about this, like, how did I do this to myself? Did I punch myself in the face? Did I hit myself hard enough to do this? How does one even do that? Do I want to know if there is even a way to do this? Like, is there an actual way? I'm not sure I want to know. But also, I'm dying of curiosity here. Mind you, this is also the same woman who lives in denial. A few years back, I actually found out that she was still in complete denial that my younger brother played soccer with a fracture leg. Even though the x-rays are there and the doctors were like, yeah, he shouldn't be playing, she was just so convinced that he would be, like, rolling on the ground in bitter agony if he had a fracture that, like, she couldn't accept this as reality. So she just sort of tuned it out. This basically sums up my entire family. If they cannot accept something, they just won't. Also, like, they come from the side of the country where you can basically end up finding out that you're related to people, like, that you didn't even know that you were related to. Yeah, which is also how I found out that, like, it was actually known, like, my grandmother actually knew this and found this out, that, like, I don't actually have the information to find this stuff out, but my grandmother had known that my dad and my little brother's dad, were cousins. And my little brother didn't actually know. I'm sorry, I don't, like, until I told him later. And, then, we had, like, mutual, oh, I'm gonna puke. Because, in some of the eastern states, you can marry your second cousin. And literally, like, I was like, okay, this makes me want to barf, so here, let me make you want to barf too. If our mom hadn't been our mom and we had, like, just our dads had been our dads, we would have been second cousins. This is why there are fucking blood tests. A lot of the Eastern... Yeah, I drank something that colored my teeth temporarily. So, I need to, like, brush it and get it off. It's kind of... So, this is why they do blood tests over there. There are so many secrets and, like, denials and secrets just piled on top of secrets. Like, this is like, in the eastern states, this is where you usually run into, like, these two half-siblings met and they married and had kids and they didn't know that they were, like, related, like, half-siblings or full siblings, and they just had no idea, because this is, like, the thing of it is that you see a lot of this stereotyping that darker skinned people are shittier fathers and shit. Actually, pale skin culture in the USA is actually a lot more about hiding that. There's a lot of hiding. There's a lot of secrets. There's a lot of layers on top of layers on top of layers. This is actually why there are states that actually make you get a blood test to even get a marriage license. Let that sink in for a second. Then you've got, like, the whole thing where, like, kids are taken away from their families, they're placed in the system, cycled through, they're separated, they may or may not even know who their siblings are, who they're related to, and even whenever there's family to place them with, they will often place them with fosters and adopt them out, and, like, this is also how we end up with situations where you have full fucking siblings who don't even know that they're related. They're so disconnected from their own family, they literally don't know who their family is. And that's where you end up with, like, full siblings. But then you end up with, like, half siblings. Like, this is one of the reasons why, like, I was so afraid to date whenever I was younger. Like, there were actually a couple people I said, I can't date you. Like, in my head I was like, I can't decide whether I'm not attracted to you because we're possibly related, or what. But just the very idea, it just made me just sick to my stomach, and also, like, I also have this thing, like, where I thought that it might have been that at first, but it actually wasn't. I actually have run into some weird stuff before, though, because my dad was kind of a man whore. So people don't just stay in one spot, they actually move. And some people stay and then some people move, you know, and yeah. I'm the obscenely open person, so therefore I have to be the crazy person. But the truth of the matter is the whole family is a bunch of nuts. My aunt can't handle reality. My grandfather spent years tuning out the fact that he married a vapid bitch who isolated him from his family and honestly, like, had to control every moment of his life, or she just couldn't reality. He spent years, just denying that. And then you've got her family who's not even denying that there was something fucking wrong with her. They just... Their biggest problem is that I talk about it. Like, they don't even have a problem with what she did, so much as the fact that I talk about it. Like, how dare I talk about it? This is, like, the general, like, this is why I like the culture that we've passed down, and that my grandmother received from her grandmother, and so on and so forth. Most of them, it kind of, like, fell out of style, I guess, before they were born. So, like, they don't even, like, know this stuff. And I'm just like, I will delve into this until the day I die, because I want nothing to do with this shit. I would much rather go back to our roots, you know, where people were straightforward and this sort of shit was considered shit. Like, yeah. This is just shit. Go back to being Scottish. Stop with this English nonsense. Because this is actually something that started, like, with the Catholics and the English. They were the ones that started the whole, we have to do things for appearances. I think it got, like, really, like, kicked off the ground during the reign of, like, Elizabeth I or something. Because, this is where most of your most asinine etiquette comes from. And this includes the fact that apparently truth is too obscene to be spoken. And this is actually, one point, a lot of Scottish people used to make fun of the British for this. I'm not gonna lie, in my head I still do. But I'm not making fun of the British, I'm just making fun of people like this. But the truth of the matter is most of my surviving relatives are exactly like this. And I can only laugh about it because it is that awkward laugh. I feel the pain of having had to deal with these people. So here's the thing, like, they just kind of deny that you exist. Like, I literally have a great uncle who calls me cousin. Because, like, they actually will change what they call you based on how they feel about you. They will make it seem like you're more distant, a less significant relation, not as close. So, like, people will even think that they're, like, second cousins, and they won't be second cousins, because it's a whole two-faced world of crap. So, my family is not the only family that's like this. My mom was awesome, my dad was awesome, they're dead, and the mess that is the rest of them is just this. My mom was more straightforward. And I've actually heard that, like, my grandfather's family was more straightforward. So, like, she actually embodied more the culture that she got from him than she did my grandmother. So, my mom didn't like this shit. She didn't pretend to be anything else. So, like, they made what flaws that, like, she wasn't hiding seem that much bigger. She became the scapegoat so that they didn't have to admit that, like, they had flaws. But this is actually how that goes. This is, like, the faux pas of that entire culture. It is entirely fucked up, as far as I'm concerned. But then again, I've had the shit end of that most of my life, so... I am like my mother in the respect that I'm honest, and I don't particularly hide my mistakes or my flaws, and they're just kind of out there. And it doesn't, like, I don't always tell people what I'm thinking all the time. Like, I'm a social introvert in that, but, like, I'm not going to lie to you either, and if it comes between, like, lying to you or telling you the truth, I will tell you the truth. And that's what they hate, because, like, they want me to lie to them. They want me to lie to them and the world and everyone else, and then they want to pretend like they have a problem with lying. This is, like, it is a vastly confusing culture to grow up in and figure out, especially whenever you're being told, like, one thing, because they're all, like, of course, Christians, and they want to be perceived as better Christians than they are. So they'll tell you that all this shit is wrong, then they'll turn around and do it. So, like, this is their culture. This is the current culture, what it's morphed into, and I'm just like, I don't like where this has gone. So I'm just gonna take a couple generation steps back and, like, not be part of that shit. Also, it doesn't help that, like, most of the family wasn't involved in receiving and passing on our culture and our history. I don't pretend to know everything about what happened, like, well before I was born. But, as far as, like, there's stuff that doesn't get passed. And I'm sure that somewhere along the way there's a lot that we've even lost in doing so. Because, you know, shit happens. And, like, not everybody has been an adult whenever they've had to deal with, you know, facing the world on their own. So, you know, without someone to continue that. So, there were points in our family history whenever it was shared among our entire family. But then it became sort of like, I guess at some point they became sort of almost important. And then they decided that they didn't need this anymore. And some of the family decided that, like, this needed to be, like, compartmentalized. And in my grandmother's case, I know that she actually had a goal to end this tradition. Like, she felt like she projected everything that she felt about how her family had acted whenever her dad did what he did and tried to do what he did, and the way that her mom responded and all that. She did everything to not put it on that, and to put it on the fact that her grandma passed these stories and this culture down to her. So I can psychoanalyze this all I want based on the books that I've read. I'm not a psychiatrist by any means. But you don't have to be a psychiatrist to read a bunch of books and analyze based on this knowledge and use common sense and things that you know that people may never even tell a psychiatrist. Like, you know them better than... The thing of it is that they don't know me. Literally, these people have kept their distance my entire life. This is all that is left of my relatives. The people, the fringe people, the people who never were involved. And my aunt. But, like, my aunt is weird. Not Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol and I are actually not related. She just dated my uncle for, like, 15 years. So, she's basically family. We just don't share blood that we know of. So, that we know of. So, this is actually something that you have to actively, like, consider in some eastern states, because so many people really are related. It's like, all the stereotypes of, like, the English being a bunch of inbred morons. Well, some of the settlers were actually, pretty isolated. So you'll have like entire groups of people who you wouldn't think were related, but they are. So this is why people have blood tests. And because at one point, there were areas that were way too inbred. And a lot of people are related, and way more related than they know. Like, even just in certain things, like, if, like, people who don't know that they're related, like, get together, and they are really just, they're far enough apart that it doesn't matter. But then, like, two more people who are, and, like, you're all, like, some level of related get together, like, it is possible even then for it to just be too close. So, like, it can actually get pretty complex. So there's actual stuff. The people have to get tested because at some point the stereotype about inbred Hicks was actually kind of true. And it was actually true for everyone. Because communities were small, cities weren't really a thing. They were just a bunch of small towns dotting the landscape, often very isolated from one another, could not always travel. And being able to go outside of your town to marry was more of a luxury than it was something everyone could do. So yeah. In the history of the United States, a lot of people really are inbred at some point. But generally speaking, everyone in the world is. Yeah. That's something that you gotta live with. At some point, everyone in the world is inbred at some point. But this is actually believed to be where... This is actually where the quote-unquote thing that you'll hear some, like, upper echelon judges excuse for what happens with some of the things in this country and going after families that haven't done anything, calling it bad genes. This is actually generally what they're referring to, because I don't think that they understand that bad genes is not really considered a thing scientifically or biologically. It's just sort of... There are speculations that the origin of birth defects could be like inbreeding at some point, but there's no proof that this is like the exclusive reason, or that all birth defects are hereditary. Like, my hip is not, as far as we know, it's not hereditary. It is a physical thing. That means that at some point I just didn't get the circulation that I should have gotten into my hip, and it just didn't form right. That's it. It's not like something that was some sort of genetic anomaly. I actually don't really have those. The only thing that might be genetic is more because they always jump on that genetic train. Like, Hashimoto's hasn't even like been discovered for that long, hasn't even been known that long, and there's already like some bullshit papers on the internet saying that it's hereditary. Like, there's no citation for this. There's no proof of this. Nobody's found the genetic markers for it. It very likely may not be. It could be, and it could not be. We don't know. It literally hasn't been discovered long enough to know. We don't know. It might not be. It might have nothing to do with genetics, period. For all we know, it could be completely environmental. Especially as we're seeing it more in the United States. And places like Japan, they were just as inbred at some point in history. Because you kind of have to understand human history to understand that at some point, everybody was little villages. And everybody was related to everybody. And this was actually normal. This was true in every single culture, every single, like, partition of humans. This is not, like, exclusive to anyone. So it's... I do, however, like, I can't help but notice that This is more common in America, despite the fact that it was discovered in Japan. And I don't know. I think that it might just be that there's more chemicals in our food. You go to Japan and other countries, their food is food. Like, you ain't gonna have sponge chicken in Japan. People are just gonna be like, is this chicken or is sponge? I'm not eating this. In America, this is normal, where you get, like, food that is so packed with all this stuff that you really shouldn't be eating. And at the end of the day, people say chemicals, but what they really mean is things I should not be putting into my body and don't want to put in my body. There's also the fact that in other countries, generally speaking, it is not the acceptable norm to just throw pills at people for no apparent reason. Do you feel sad today? Here's a pill for that. That's not actually how it works, and it actually fucks people up to do that. It's actually been proven that raises the rate of suicides and all sorts of things, because you're handing them a pill, and instead of dealing with it, those emotions still build inside. It's actually very damaging. But they do that a lot in the USA, and especially in areas like mine, in Arizona, their first response to basically everything is to throw pills at it. And it's not congruent with anything therapeutic to just throw pills at things. And there's even things that it's not good to throw pills at all, like PTSD. Like, they say that this pill works for it, but for like over half of the people that like take it, it actually makes them worse. Like, and then there's the people who find it tolerable, and you have to wonder, like, does it still make their flashbacks more intense? Or like, and it's just like a lesser level? And they just deal with it because, like, now they can sleep? Or is it that the change that happens in your brain is just that complex and they don't understand it, and some people, like, just get something just enough different, or, you know, just something that they don't understand? Because here's the thing, the human brain is not a uniform construct. We all are organic, and that means when we are organic, it's like no carrot has the same ridges. We all have, like, the same form in our brain, unless you are someone who was born with a different, with a brain that somehow formed differently. Some people who have schizophrenia actually have that, where it is because their brain is different. Like, physically, it formed different. It's not just the chemicals in their brain, like, it's actually a different structure. You know, they've actually found this stuff, but they don't use this stuff in diagnosing anyone. They don't even, like, test most people who are diagnosed for this stuff. You would actually find, like, if you measured some of the chemicals in people's brains of everyone who's diagnosed, and you actually did this, like, with the idea that some of these people might not even have it, you would actually find that a lot of people are convinced that they have it because they've been told, but they don't actually. PTSD can get a little bit more complicated because not everyone that has it has a visible difference in their brain, but some do. So they don't really understand. All they know is that the trauma is so extreme that it actually changes something physically in your brain. Yeah. Don't really know where to go with that. You don't, like, have to get hit on the head or anything. Just that happens. But also, like, if you are so shielded that you just live in a bubble, the threshold of trauma, of what becomes traumatic for you, is actually a lot less than what it is for someone who's actually had to live in reality. So I think that this is actually part of how we get SJWs. I've got a lot of theories on this, because I've literally, like, just, sometimes I just kind of drift off and thought, how did this happen? Like, sociologically, I understand it, because I've actually done a lot of research just for funsies on that. But, and I know enough psychology from doing research for funsies on that, and also to answer in-depth questions to do with why did this shit happen? Because I'm that person. I cannot just... I need to know why. I need to know the rational reason that this shit happened. I need to know how. I need to know why. I need to know what made this person tick, who was involved in this part of it, in why. That's... I can't just be told, you'll drive yourself crazy with why. I actually have to know why. This is how I deal with it. People deal in different ways. Some people are like, oh, I just go to my happy face. I will myself into happiness. It doesn't actually work that way. That's actually more denial than convincing yourself to be happy. And denial can actually lead down its own twisted road of fucked upness. And I've actually known people who were like that, who did not even see how twisted they became as human beings, because they didn't face these things. Instead, they decided to deny that they were even affected by them. I don't deny that I'm affected. I deny that, well, it doesn't stop me from functioning. So, I am a functioning member of society, despite all this. But, man, is it a lot. So, I can take a bite out of it, like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time? That's what my grandfather always used to say. It's like that. Except I need to analyze the fuck out of it. And I need the information to analyze the fuck out of it effectively. Because I will not stop until, I know. And then I will move on to the next thing. And I've actually spent a lot of time on that in my life. Like, I've spent years on this, because I can't just sit there and research all the time on it. Like, you piecemeal it. You make time for that shit. And then you think about the things that you find in research, and, and you sift through it. And you figure out, why are they this way? Why is this okay with them? If it's not okay with them, why is it so easy for them to deny it? And then you actually come to, like, an uncomfortable result sometimes. Like, some people, it really is easy for them to deny it, but some people, they actually have to try pretty hard to be in denial. Like, this takes actual effort for them. And some people actually put actual effort into being in denial and staying there. It's insane. But there's also documents out there that actually say your thoughts cannot be sick. This idea that your thoughts can be sick is preposterous, and there's literally no proof. And I have to agree with that. Like, based on my research, I have to agree with that. People, I believe, can be sick down to their soul. But not like catching a cold. It's more their choices have led them there. To this place of where they've just twisted and tried to justify too many wrong things that there isn't a justification for. And they become the sum of their choices. They become something I will never understand, no matter how much I research it. Because even if I can logically break it down and analyze the fuck out of it, I will still never make those choices. I mean, I will never understand those choices that they have made and why in those moments they decided that that was better than what is still rationally the better choices. I can't understand that, and I will never understand that. But knowing rationally and being able to break it down rationally, that is helpful. I will never understand them on that deep level because I will never be them. I've never made those choices. I've never thought that that was a good idea. That will never be me. But it is kind of comforting to be able to break it down in a weird way. Like, in a weird way, it's comforting. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a cold comfort, but at least then you can kind of tackle this thing that's already so much bigger than you. Especially whenever this stuff happened whenever you were a kid. Like, you were really little and this stuff was even bigger than it is whenever you're an adult. And this is how you break it down. This is how you make it something that's, this is how you make sense of it and how it's part of the world that you live in. Why it's part of the world that you live in. And even then, it doesn't really tell you why sometimes. It just doesn't feel like it should be that way anyway. But it's still just that little bit easier to deal with. That's how I deal with a lot of it. I look for how this happened, why it happened, how people can let this happen. You name it, I've asked it. And I've searched for the answers instead of just sitting there on my rump waiting for someone to spoon feed them to me. The result is that I probably know a fair bit about it. But you do that. I could not reconcile the world that I was born into, the world that I was raised in, with what it was supposed to be. That's the best way that I can put it. Like, I guess I shouldn't say the world I was born into. My parents were good people. Like, her family will drag her through the mud for not having been married to my dad. My aunt will make it sound like my mom was the worst person in the world just because, she'll even twist stories that were about her and put them on my mom because this woman just lives in a wall of just denial. And my grandmother, some of the stuff my grandmother would even admit was her. Yeah, not my mom. And my mom was like the kid who couldn't do any good. My uncle was the kid who couldn't do any wrong. And my aunt was just kind of there. She was the baby. It didn't matter if she did right or wrong. That's kind of what my grandmother ended up doing to her kids. So, like, my uncle has no sense of accountability whatsoever. My mom just sort of was like, I'm gonna live my life. And, like, her early years were basically looking for love in all the wrong places. Because she didn't really have the affection that she needed. So I can analyze that. I think even if my mom was alive today, she would probably agree with that. Because I knew my mom pretty well. And we were very close. And you can fall back on some memories and be like, yeah, my mom was a person who was constantly trying to fix herself. And you can even kind of look back and, like, know that there had to have been a moment whenever she realized sometimes you don't need fixing. And there is no sunshine and rainbows way to put this, but some people just walk around for the rest of their lives feeling broken inside. And it never goes away. I wish it did, but it doesn't. You just keep going. Sometimes it's out of spite, sometimes it's for the hope that there's something better, for something worth carrying that with you for. And if you hold on for that, you'll find it. But you'll also find that the world is actually a pretty shitty place. There's a lot of shitty people in it. A lot of people who make those shitty decisions or just stand there. Like, I'm working on the outline for a story because, like, I completely scrapped the old one that I was contemplating. Well, no, more like put it on a back burner. It felt like something that needed more fleshed out than I was actually going to end up doing to it. So, there's a reason why whenever I group my characters, I have my protagonists, my antagonists, and my bystanders. Bystanders are characters that don't really actively do either thing, but by being that way, they inadvertently make the situation what it is. In a story, whenever we read it, we all want to be in the protagonist's shoes, or the antagonist's shoes, depending on who's writing and who's reading. But both life and stories have a lot of bystanders. Bystanders, they can ideologically support either side, but they don't really do anything. They just let the protagonist or the antagonist kind of pull them in that direction. They don't do anything to stop it. They don't do anything to really push it forward, but their inaction, their silence, either in action or in words, or both, it makes it possible for this to even happen in the first place. I will be the first to say there are a lot of bystanders. In life, too. For me, it was a perfect analogy of what it's like to live in this world. Whenever Antifa goes to, beat people up, and there's entire crowds just standing there doing nothing. This person isn't really a Nazi. Some of these people are actually there seeing what they're about because they actually might want to join them. And this has actually happened. Somebody who was actually there to see what Antifa was about and to kind of think about, do I want to stand for this? They were asking themselves these questions based on what they were being told that Antifa was supposed to stand for. And they got beat up while the crowd just watched. Because the moment that they screamed Nazi, the crowd was like, I don't know this person. How can I help this person if I don't know them? And they just didn't. They played the, I don't know, so I do nothing, I hear nothing, I see nothing. And then, somebody just whips out their phone and videotapes it, because that's... And people act like this is shocking. No. It's not at all shocking to me. This literally is the perfect analogy of what it was like for me growing up. It's also the perfect analogy of what it was like whenever these people came after my family as an adult. Everybody was like, oh, well, they were all acknowledging that this was shit, that there was nothing, and, they're not supposed to be able to do this, but nobody's doing anything, so I guess they won't step out and do anything either. That was the mindset. it's a very common mindset that people get. It's there. We all are subject to it. So we all need to keep that in mind and not, like, be aware of it whenever this happens. Because you can't just stand there and do nothing. If someone is getting the tar beat out of them, you fucking stop it. I don't care if it is two gangs going at each other. You call 911. Okay, if they have guns, call 911. Like, there's always something you can do, even if that something isn't to physically, like, intervene. And in the case of Antifa, you are literally against other people who aren't any armed than you are. These people aren't carrying guns. They literally are picking up, like, something off the ground and hitting someone with it. So, you're telling me that nobody in that crowd knows how to deal with this? Oh, I call bullshit on that. There are too many people who know how to deal with this shit. There are too many people who, if this was their family member or their friend or somebody that they knew, they would know what to do. They would step in and do something. And then there are people who just wouldn't because they're worth shit. Because if you can watch your family get beat up like that, you are shit. If you can, like, watch a stranger get beat up like that, you're still shit. Because this means that you are so weak in character that if this was someone you did know, you would potentially watch this happen to them too. Because all it would take is that little bit of doubt planted in your mind. And this is how fragile humans are. This is how fragile the way that we think is. The way that we think about one another is. And this is why this even happens. Because all it takes is just the question, could it be true? You don't know. Even if these people have no history of ever actually punching an actual Nazi, or this person has no history of ever doing anything wrong like this, that you would see as justified for this, it doesn't matter.
Mama?
What, dear?
Can I go potty, please?
Why are you asking? Nap time's over. It's been over. We keep on telling him to stop asking. Sometimes he'll actually wake us up, so. In the middle of the night. I guess he wants validation that he's using the toilet. I don't know. He'll grow out of it. So. Anyway, people work. The way people think is actually relatively fragile. And I guess that's kind of scary to some people. But also, you can choose how you think too. So you can be aware of the fact that you're being a fragile dick whenever you're standing on the side watching somebody get the tar beat out of them. Tar. I have to say tar. I'm using adjusted language for Punchkin in the house. Because I know he's been awake. And I know that was manufactured tiredness. Well, the tiredness might not be, but the way he was trying to sound like he just woke up was. My hearing is pretty good, and I can actually hear the difference. So, it's in the different tones. It's hard to really explain to anybody who can't hear it. But suffice to say, I also can't hear silence. Yeah. My ears cannot physically hear silence. Because the hairs in my ears are so fine. So, like, my grandmother actually used to make fun of me for this. because she could not resist. Let's see, with my aunt, she made fun of her for being really skinny, really pale, and having dark hair. So she also used to make fun of her, calling her different names and calling her Morticia as well, saying that if she, like, stood behind a pole and turned sideways, she'd be invisible. My mom was basically got the you're pretty, so you must be sleeping with everything with a dick comments. And my uncle, I don't think I want to repeat some of the things that she said about my uncle. Like, there were some low blows in there, like, actually, you know what I'm going to. They said that he was bad with money. Most of his stuff was, like, about his ex-wife, though. Like, so, like, it feels like I'm not even talking about him just to talk about the things that they said about him, because literally my uncle could do no wrong. There was a little bit of a thing about how my grandmother, but, like, the way that she did it was different. Like, it was okay that my uncle was basically being seen as a man whore who used women and his good looks for pizza and extra helpings of food. This is also why he's extremely fat. Unlike me, who has an actual problem and gets actual exercise in a day, my uncle is literally fat because he does not exercise and he eats a ton of food. The irony is he is also not that good of a cook. And you can't tell him this because he will simply not hear you. Not like physically not hear you, he will just like shut it out. I don't even understand it. Like, even my grandmother would try to tell him that he was putting too much of this, that, and the other in there, and that he needed to kind of, like, stop. And he would just tune her out. She would be trying to help him, and you would just be kind of like, these eggs